laden into boats in the market pool. Weapons were being flung down. There was mourning and weeping where there was but little time, where but a little time ago the old songs of mirth to come had been sung about the dwarves. Now men cursed their names. The master himself was turning to his great gilded boat, hoping to row away in the confusion and save himself. Soon all the town would be deserted and burned down to the surface of the lake. That was the dragon's hope. They could all get into the boats for all he cared. There he would have the finest sport hunting them, for there he could stop until they starved. Let them try to get to land and he would be ready. Soon he would set all the shoreland woods ablaze and wither every field and pasture. Now he was just enjoying the sport of town baiting more than he had enjoyed anything for years. But there was still a company of archers that held their ground among the burning houses. Their captain, Bard, grim-faced and grim-voiced, whose friends had accused him of prophesying floods and poisoned fish, though they knew his worth and courage. He was a descendant in the long line of Girion, Lord of Dale, whose wife and children had escaped down a running river from ruin long ago. And now he shot with his great yew bow till all his arrows but one were spent. The flames were near him. His companions were leaving him. He bent his bow for the last time. Suddenly, out of the dark, something fluttered to his shoulder. He started, but it was only an old thrush. Unafraid, it perched by his ear and brought him news. Marvelling, he found he could understand its tongue, for it was the race of Dale. Wait, he said. It said to him, the moon is rising. Look to the hollow of the left abreast, as he flies and turns above you. And while Bard paused in wonder, it told him of the riddles, of the tidings up in the mountains, and of all that it had heard. And then Bard drew his bowstring to his ear. The dragon was circling back, flying low. And as he came, the moon rose above the eastern shore and silvered his great wings. Arrow, said the bowman, Black Arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me, and I have always recovered you. I had you from my father, and he from old. If ever you came from the forges of the true king under the mountain, go now and speed well. The dragon swooped once more, lower than ever, and as he turned and dived down, his belly glittered white with sparkling fires, gems in the moon, but not in one place. The great bow twanged. The black arrow sped straight through from the string, straight through the hollow of the left breast where the foreleg was flung wide open, and it smote and vanquished barb, shaft, and feather. So fierce was its flight. With a shriek that deafened men, felled trees and split stones, Smorg shot, spouting up into the air, turned over and crashed down from the high in ruin. Full on the town he fell. Parks and glades, and the lake roared in. Vast steam leapt up, white in the moon. There was a hiss, a gurgling, gushing whirl, and then silence. That was the end of Smaug and Eskel, but not of Bard. The waxing moon rose higher and higher, and the wind grew loud and cold. It twisted the white fog into bending pillars and hurrying clouds, and drove it off to the west to scatter in tattered shreds over the marshes before Mirkwood. Then many boats could be seen dotted on the surface of the lake. Down the wind came the voices of the people of Esgaroth, lamenting their lost town and goods and ruined houses. But they really had much to be thankful for, had they thought of it, for though it could be hardly expected that they should be just then, 3/4 of the people of the town had at least escaped alive. Their woods and fields and pastures and cattle, and most of their boats remained undamaged, and the dragon was dead. What that meant, they had not yet realized. They gathered in mournful crowds upon the western shores, shivering in the cold wind, with their first complaints and anger were against the master who had left the town so soon, while some were left still willing to defend it. He may have a good head for business, especially his own business, some murmured, but he is no good when anything serious happens. And they praised the courage of the bard and his last mighty shot. If only he had not been killed, they said, we would make him a king. Bard, the dragon shooter of the line of Girion, alas, that he is lost. And in the very midst of their talk, a tall figure stepped from the shadows. He was drenched with water. His black hair hung wet over his face and shoulders, and a fierce light was in his eyes. Bard is not lost, he cried. He died from Esgaroth when the enemy was slain. I am Bard of the line of Girion. I am the slayer of the dragon. King Bard! King Bard! They shouted, but the master ground his chattering teeth. Girion was Lord of Dale, not of Esgaroth, he said. In the lake town we have always elected masters from the old and wise, and have not endured the rule of mere fighting men. Let King Bard go back to his own kingdom. Dale is now free by his valour, and nothing hinders his return. And any that wish can go with him, if they prefer cold stones under the shadows of mountains to the green shores of the lake. The wise will stay here and hope to rebuild our town and enjoy again its time, its peace and riches. We will have King Bard, the people said near at hand, and shouted in reply. We have had enough of old men and money counters. And people further off took up the cry, up the bowmen and down with the money bags. Still, till the echo clamoured the whole shore along. I'm the last man to undervalue Bard the bowman, said the master wearily, for Bard stood close beside him. He has tonight earned an excellent, eminent place in the roll of the benefactors of our town, and he is worthy of many imperishable songs. But why, O people, and here the master rose to his feet and spoke very loud and clear, why do I get all your blame? For what fault am I to be disposed? Who aroused the dragon from his slumber, I might ask? Who obtained of us rich gifts and ample help, and led us to believe that old songs could come true? Who played on our soft hearts and from our pleasant fancies? What sort of gold have they sent down the river and reward us? Dragon fire and ruin. From whom should we claim the recompense of our damage and aid for our widows and orphans? As you see, the master had not got his position for nothing. The result of his words was that for the moment people quite forgot the idea of their new king and turned their angry thoughts towards Thorin and his company. Wild and bitter words were shouted from many sides, and some of those who had before sung the old songs loudest were now heard as loudly crying that the dwarves had stirred the dragon up against them deliberately. Fools, said Bard. Why waste words on wrath? On those unhappy creatures. Doubtless they perished first in the fire before Smaug came to us. And then even as he was speaking, the thought came to his heart of the fabled treasure of the mountain, lying without guard or owner, and he fell suddenly silent. He thought of the master's words and of Dale rebuilt and filled with golden bells, if he could but find the men. At length he spoke again. This is no time for angry words, master, or for considering weighty plans of change. There is work to do. I still serve you, though after a while I may think again of your words and go north with any that will follow me. Then he strode off to help. in the ordering of the camps and in the care of the sick and the wounded. But the master scowled at his back as he went and remained sitting on the ground. He thought much, but said little, unless it was to call loudly for men to bring him fire and food. Now, everywhere Bard went, he found talk running like fire among people concerning the vast treasure that was now unguarded. Men spoke of all the recompense for their harm that they would get soon from it, and the wealth over and to spare with which, and the wealth over and to spare with which to buy rich things from the south. And it cheered them greatly in their plight. That was as well, for the night was bitter and miserable. Shelters could be contrived for the few. The master had one, and there was little food even when the master went short. Many took ill of wet and cold and sorrow of that night, and afterwards died, who had escaped uninjured from the ruin of the town. And in the days that followed there was much sickness, and there was great hunger. Meanwhile Bard took the lead and ordered things as he wished, though always in the master's name, and he had a hard task to govern the people and direct the preparations for their protection and housing. Probably most of them would have perished in the winter that now hurried after autumn, if help had not been to hand, but help came swiftly, for Bard at once had speedy messengers sent up the river to the forest to ask the king of the elves of the wood. With these messengers he had found a host already on the move, although it was already only the third day after the fall of snow. The elven king had received news from his own messengers and from the birds that loved his folk, and already he knew much of what had happened. Very great indeed was the commotion among all things with wings that dwelt on the borders of the desolation of the dragon. The air was filled with circling flocks, and their swift-flying messengers flew here and there across the sky. Above the borders of the forest there was whistling, crying, and piping. Far over Mirkwood, tidings spread. Smaug is dead. Leaves rustled and started. Startled ears were lifted. Even before the elven king rode forth, the news had passed west, right to the pinewoods of the misty mountains. Bjorn had heard it in his wooden house, and the goblins were at council in the caves. That will be the last we shall hear of Thorin Oakenshield, I fear, said the king. He would have done better to have remained my guest. It is an ill wind all the same, he added, that blows no one any good. For he too had not forgotten the legend of the wealth of Thror. So it was that Bard's messengers found him now marching with many spearmen and bowmen, and crows were gathering above them, for they thought that war was awakening again, such as had not been in those parts for a long age. But the king, when he received the prayers of Bard, had pity, for he was the lord of a good and kindly people. And so turning to his march, which had first been direct towards the mountain, he hastened now down the river towards the long lake. He had not boats or rafts enough for his host, and they were forced to go the slower way by foot, but great store of goods he sent ahead by water. Still elves are light-footed, and though they were not in these days much used to marches and the treacherous lands between the forest and the lake, their going was swift. Only 5 days after the death of the dragon, they came upon the shores and looked upon the ruins of the town, and their welcome was good, as may be expected, and the men and their master were ready to make any bargain for the future in return for the elven king's aid. Their plans were soon made, with the women and the children, the old and the unfit. The master remained behind. With him were some men of crafts and many skilled elves, and they busied themselves felling trees from the forest, and then they set about raising many huts by the shore against the oncoming winter. And also, under the master's direction, they began the planning of a new town, large even than before, but not in the same place. They removed the northward higher up on the shore. Forever after, they had a dread of the water where the dragon lay. he would never again return to his golden bed, but was stretched as cold stone twisted upon the floor of the shallows. There for ages his huge bones could be seen in calm weather, amid ruined piles of the old town, but few dared to cross the cursed spot, and none dared to dive into the shivering water to recover precious stones that fell from his rotting carcass. But the men of arms who were still able, and most of the Elven king's array, got ready to march north to the mountain. It was thus that in 11 days from the ruin of the town, the head of their host passed the rock gates at the end of the lake and came into the desolate lands. Chapter 15. Of the Clouds. Now we will return to Bilbo and the dwarves. All night one of them had watched, but when the morning came they had not heard or seen any sign of danger. But evermore thickly the birds were gathering. Their companies came flying from the south. Their crows that still lived about the mountain were wheeling and crying unceasingly above. "Something strange is happening," said Thorin. "The time has gone for the autumn wanderings. These are birds that dwell always in the land. There are starlings and flocks of finches, and far off many carrion birds, as if a battle were afoot." Suddenly Bilbo pointed. There's that old thrush again," he cried. "He seems to have escaped when Small smashed the mountainside, but I don't suppose the snails have." Sure enough, the old thrush was there, and Bilbo pointed, and he flew towards them and perched on a stone nearby. Then he fluttered his wings and sang. Then he cocked his head to one side as if to listen, and again he sang, and he listened again. "I believe he's trying to tell us something," said Balin, "but I cannot follow the speech of such birds. It's very quick and difficult. Can you make it out, Baggins?" "No, not very well," said Baggins. "As a matter of fact, he can make nothing of it at all. But the old fellow seems very excited." "I only wish I was a raven." "Well, I thought you did not like them. You seemed very shy of them when we came this way before." "Oh, no, they were crows, and nasty, suspicious-looking creatures at that. Rude as well. No, you must have heard the ugly names they were calling after us. But ravens are very different. There used to be great friendship between them and the people of Thraw. They often brought us secret news, and we were rewarded with bright things, such as coveted to hide in their dwellings. They live many a year. Their memories are long, and they hand on their wisdom to their children. And I knew many among the ravens of the rocks when I was a dwarf lad. These were very high. This very height was once named Raven Hill because there was a wise and famous pair, old Kirk and his wife, that lived here above the guard chamber. I don't suppose any of that ancient breed linger here now." No sooner as he'd finished speaking than the old thrush gave a loud call and immediately flew away. "Well, we may not understand him, but that old bird understands us, I am sure," said Balin. "Keep watch now. See what happens." Before long there was a fluttering of wings, and back came the thrush, and with him came the most decrepit old bird. He was getting blind. He could hardly fly, and the top of his head was bald. He was an aged raven of great size. He alighted stiffly on the ground before them and slowly flapped his wings and bobbed towards Thorin. "Oh, Thorin, son of Thrain and Balin of Fundin," he croaked. And Bilbo could not understand what he said, for he used ordinary language and not bird speech. "I am Rog, son of Kirk, and Kirk is dead, but me may as well be known to you once. It is 100 years and 53 since I came out of an egg, and I do not forget what my father said. Now I am the chief of the great ravens of the mountain. We few, but we remember still the kings of old. Most of my people are abroad, for there are great tidings in the south. Some tidings of joy to you, and some will not be so good, you think. Behold, the birds are gathering back in the mountains again, and a gale from the south and east and west, for the word has gone out that Smaug is dead. Dead? Dead? Shouted the dwarves. Dead? Then we have been needless fear, and the treasure is ours. They all sprang up and began to caper about for joy. Yes, dead, said Roic. The thrush, may his feathers never fall, saw him die, and may trust his words. He saw him fall in the battle with the men of Oscaroth, with the third night back from now, and the rising moon. It was some time before Thorin could bring the dwarfs to be silent and listen to the raven's news. At length, when he had told all the tale of the battle, he went on. So much for joy, O Thorin Oakenshield, you may go back to your halls in safety. And all the treasure is yours for the moment. But there are many gathering hither beside birds. The news of death of the Guardian has already gone far and wide, and the legend of the wealth of the Thrall has not lost in the telling during these many years. Many are eager for the spare of spoil. Already a host of elves is on its way, and carrion birds are there with them, hoping for battle and slaughter. By the lake men murmur that sorrows are due to the dwarves, for they are homeless and have died, many of them, and Smaug has destroyed their town, they think, to find amends from your treasure, whether you are alive or dead. Your own wisdom must decide your course, but 13 is a small remnant of the great folk of Durin that once dwelt here and are now scattered far. If you will listen to my counsel, you will not trust the master of lake men, but rather him that shot the dragon with his bow. Bard he is, of the race of Dale, of the line of Girion. He is a grim man, but true. We would see peace once more among the dwarves and men and elves after long desolation, but it may cost you dear in gold. I have spoken. Then Thorin burst forth in anger. Thanks, Rowan, Roark, Kark's son. You and your people shall not be forgotten, but none of our gold shall thieves take, or the violent carry off while we are alive. If you would earn our thanks still more, bring us news of that any that draw near. And also I would beg of you, if any of you are still young and strong of wing, that you would send messengers to our kin in the mountains of the north, both west of here and east, to tell them of our plight. But go specially to my cousin Dane in the Iron Hills, for he has many people, well armed, and dwells nearest to this place. Bid him hasten. I will not say this counts if this. I will not say if this counsel be good or bad, croaked Roic, but I will only do what can be done. And then off he flew softly. Back now to the mountain, cried Thorin. We have little time to lose, and little food to use, cried Bilbo, always practical on such points. In any case, he felt that the adventure was, properly speaking, over with the death of the dragon, in which he was much mistaken. He would have given most of his share of the profits for the peaceful winding up of these affairs. Back to the mountains, cried the dwarves, as if they had not heard him. So back he had to go with them. As you have heard of some of the events already, you will see that the dwarves still had some days before them. They explored the caverns once more and found, as they expected, that only the front gate remained open. All the other gates, except of course for the small secret door, had long ago been broken and blocked by Smaug, and no sign of them remained. So now they began to labour hard in fortifying the main entrance and in making a new path that led from it. Tools were to be found in plenty that the miners and the quarriers and the builders of old had used, and at such work the dwarves still were very, very skilled. As they worked, the ravens brought them constant tidings. In this way they learned that the elven king had turned aside to the lake, and they still had a breathing space. Better still, they had heard that 3 of the ponies had escaped and were wandering wild far down the banks of the running river, not far from where the rest of the stores had been left. So while the others went on with their work, Philly and Killy were sent, guided by a raven, to find the ponies and bring back all they could. They were 4 days gone, and by the time they knew that the joined armies of the lake men and the elves were hurrying towards the mountain, and by then, importantly, 4 days were gone, and by that time they knew that the joined armies of the lake men and the elves were hurrying toward the mountain. But now their hopes were higher, for they had food and food for some weeks with care, chiefly cram, of course, which they were very tired of. But cram is much better than nothing, and already the gate was blocked with a wall of squared stones laid dry but very thick and high across the opening. There were holes in the wall through which they could see or shoot, but no entrance. They climbed in or out with ladders. They hauled stuff up with ropes for the issuing of the stream. They had contrived a small, slow arch underneath the wall, but near the entrance. So now they altered the narrow bed so that a wide pool stretched from the mountain wall to the head of the fall, over which the stream went down to Dale. Approach to the gate was now only possible, without swimming, along a narrow ledge to the cliff. To the right, as one looked outwards from the wall, the ponies they had brought only to the head of the steps above the old bridge, and unloading them there, had bidden them return to their masters and sent them back riderless to the south. There came at night, when suddenly there were many lights of fires and torches away south in Dale before them. "They've come," called Barley, "and their camp is very great. And they must have come into the valley under cover of dusk along both of the banks of the river." That night the dwarves slept little. The morning, still pale, they saw the company approaching. From behind their wall they watched them come up to the valley's head and climb slowly. Before long they could see that both men of the lake, armed as if for war, and elvish bowmen were among them. At length the foremost of these climbed the tumbled rocks and appeared at the top of the falls. Very great was their surprise to see the pool before them and the gate blocked with a wall of new hewn stone. As they stood pointing and speaking toward one another, Thorin hailed them. "Who are you?" he called in a very loud voice. "Who are you?" he called in a very loud voice. "That comes here as if to war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain? What is it you desire?" But they answered nothing. Some turned swiftly back, and the others, after gazing for a while at the gate and in defences, soon followed them. Then that day the camp was moved to the east of the river, right between the arms of the mountain. The rocks echoed with the voices with song, too, of elven harps and of sweet music, and as it echoed up towards them, it seemed that the chill of the air was warmed, and they caught faintly the fragrance of woodland flowers blossoming in spring. Then Bilbo longed to escape from the dark fortress and to go down to join the mirth and the feasting by the fire. Some of the younger dwarfs were moved in their hearts too, and they muttered that they had wished things had fallen out otherwise, and that they had come welcome, and that they might welcome such folk as friends. But Thorin scowled. And then the dwarves themselves brought forth harps and instruments and regained from the hoard and made music to soften his mood. But their song was not an elvish song, but was much like the song they had sung before in Bilbo's little hobbit hole. Under the mountain dark and tall, the king has come unto his hall. His foe is dead, the worm of dread, and ever so his foes should fall. The sword is sharp, the spear is long, the arrow swift, the gate is strong. The heart is bold that looks on gold. The dwarves shall no more suffer wrong. The dwarves of yore made mighty spells, while hammers fell like ringing bells in places deep where dark things sleep, in hollow halls beneath the fells. On silver necklaces they strung the light of stars, on crowds they hung the dragon fire from twisted wire, the melody of harps they rung. The mountain throne once more is freed. Summons heed, come haste, across the waste. The king friend and king has need. Now call we over mountain back unto the caverns old. Here at the gates the king awaits. His hands are rich with gems and gold. The king is come unto his hall, under the mountain dark and tall. The worm of dread is slain and dead, and ever so our foes shall fall. This song appeared to please Thorin, and he smiled again and grew merry, and he began reckoning the distance to the Iron Hills and how long it would be before Dane could reach the Lonely Mountains if he set out as soon as the message reached him. But Bilbo's heart fell, both at the song and the talk. They sounded much too warlike. The next morning early, a company of spearmen was seen crossing the river and marching up the valley. They bore with them the green banner of the Elven King and the blue banner of the lake, and they advanced until they stood right before the wall of the gate. Again Thorin hailed them in a loud voice. "Who are ye that come armed for war to the gates of Thorin, son of Thrain, king under the mountain?" This time he was answered. A tall man stood forward, dark of hair, grim of face, and cried, "Hail, Thorin! Why do you fence yourself like a robber in this hold? We are not yet foes, and we rejoice that you are alive and beyond our hope. We came expecting to find none living here, and yet now that we are met, there is matter for parley and counsel." "Who are ye? And what would you want to parley? Why would you want parley?" I am Bard, and by my hand was the dragon slain, and your treasure delivered. Is that not a matter that concerns you? Moreover, I am by right descent to the heir of Girion of Dale, and your hoard is mingled much of the wealth of his halls and towns where old Smaug stole. Is not that a matter of which we may speak? Further in this last battle, Smaug destroyed the dwellings of the men of Esgaroth, and yet I am the servant of their master. I would speak for him and ask whether you have no thought for the sorrows and the misery of his people. They aided you in your distress, and in recompense, you have thus far brought ruin only, though doubtless undesigned. Now these words were fair and true, and proudly and grimly spoken, and Bilbo thought that Thorin would at once admit what justice was in them. He did not, of course, expect that anyone would remember that it was he who discovered all by himself the dragon's weak spot, and no one ever did. But also he did not reckon with the power that the gold has upon which a dragon long brooded, nor with dwarvish hearts. Past days Thorin had spent in the treasury, and the lust of it was heavy on him. Though he had hunted chiefly for the Arkenstone, yet he had an eye for many another wonderful thing that was lying there, above which were wound old memories of the labours and the sorrows of his race. You put your worst case, your worst cause last, and the chief and in chief place, Thorin answered. To the treasure of my people, no man has a claim, because Smaug, who stole it from us, also robbed him of life or home. The treasure was not his, and his evil deeds should be amended with a share of it. The price of the goods and the assistance that we receive by the Lakemen, we will fairly pay in due time, but nothing will we give, not even a loaf's worth, under the threat of force, while an army host lies before our doors, and we look on you as foes and thieves. It is in my mind to ask you, what share of their inheritance you would have paid to our kindred? Have you found the hoard unguarded and us slain? A just question, replied Bard. But you are not dead, and we're not robbers. Moreover, we, the wealthy, may have pity beyond right on the needy that befriended them when they were in want, and still my other claims remain unanswered. But I will not parley, as I have said, with armed men at my gate, nor with the people of the Elven Kingdom I remembered with the smallest kindness. In this debate they have no place. Begone now, ere our arrows fly. And if you speak with me again, first dismiss this elvish host to the woods where it belong, and then return. Lay down your arms before you approach this threshold. The Elven King is my friend. He has succoured to the people of the lake in their need, and he has, though they had no claim but friendship to him, answered Bard. We will give you time to repent your words. Gather your wisdom ere we will return. And then he departed, and he went back to the camp. Ere many hours were past, the banner bearers returned, and trumpeters stood forth and blew a blast. In the name of Esgaroth and the forest, one cried, we speak unto Thorin, Thrain son of Oakenshield, Thrain son Oakenshield, calling himself the king under the mountain, and we bid him to consider well the claims that have been urged or be declared our foe. At least he shall be delivered 1/12 portion of the treasure unto Bard as the dragon slayer and as the heir of Girion. From that portion Bard will himself contribute to the aid of Esgaroth. But if Thorin would have the friendship and honour of the lands about, as his sires of the old, then he will give also somewhat of his own for the comfort of the men of the lake. And then Thorin seized a bow of horn and shot an arrow at the speaker. It smote into his shield and stuck there, quivering. Since this is your answer, he called in return, I declare the mountain besieged. You shall not depart from it until you call on your side a truce and a parley. We will bear no weapons against you, but we will leave you to your gold. You may eat that if you will. And with that the messengers departed swiftly, and the dwarves were left to consider their case. So grim had Thorin become that even if they had wished, the others would not have dared to find fault with him. But indeed most of them seemed to share his mind, except perhaps old fat Bomber, Philly and Killy. Bilbo, of course, disapproved of the whole turn of affairs. He had by now had enough, more than enough of the mountain, and being besieged inside was not at all to his taste. The whole place stinks of dragon, he grumbled to himself. It makes me sick. And cram is beginning simply to stick in my throat. Chapter 16. A Thief in the Night. Now, the days passed slowly and warily. Many of the dwarves spent their time piling and ordering the treasure, and now Thorin spoke of the Arkenstone of Thrain and bade them eagerly to look for it in every corner. The Arkenstone of my father, he said, is worth more than a river of gold. In itself, to me, it is beyond price. That stone, of all the treasure I name unto myself, and I will be avenged on anyone who finds it and withholds it. Bilbo heard these words, and he grew afraid, wondering what would happen if the stone was found, wrapped in an old bundle of tattered oddments that he used as a pillow. All the same, he did not speak of it, for as the weariness of the days grew heavier, the beginnings of a plan had come into his little head. Things had gone on like this for some time, and the ravens brought news that Dane and more than 500 dwarves hurrying from the Iron Hills were now within 2 days' march of Dale, coming down from the northeast.
But they cannot come. They cannot reach the mountain unmarked, said Roak, and I fear lest there be a battle in the valley. I do not call this counsel good, though there is a grim folk. They are a grim folk. They are not likely to overcome the host that besets you. And even if they did so, what will you gain? Winter and snow is hastening behind them. How shall you be fed without the friendship and goodwill of the lands about you? The treasure is likely to be your death, though the dragon is no more.
But Thorin was moved.
Winter and snow will bite both men and elves, he said, and they may find their dwelling in waste grievous to bear. With my friends behind them when the winter upon them, they will perhaps be in softer mood to parley with.
That night Bilbo made up his mind. The sky was black and moonless. As soon as it was full dark, he went to a corner of the inner chamber just within the gate and drew from his bundle a rope, and also the Arkenstone. The Arkenstone, wrapped in a cloth. Then he climbed on top of the wall. Only Bombur was there, for it was his turn to watch, and the dwarves kept only one watchman at a time.
Oh, it's mighty cold, said Bombur. I wish I could have a fire for this place, as they have in the camp.
Well, it's warm enough inside, said Bilbo.
I dare say, but I'm warm bound here till midnight, grumbled the fat dwarf. Sorry business altogether, not that I venture to disagree with Thorin, but may his beard grow ever longer. Yet he ever was a dwarf with a stiff neck.
Not as stiff as my legs, said Bilbo. I am tired of stairs and stone passages, and I would give a good deal for the feel of grass at my toes.
I would give a good deal for the feel of a strong drink in my throat and for a soft bed after a good supper.
I can't give you those while the siege is going on, but it's so long since I watched, and I will take your turn for you if you like, as there is no sleep in me tonight.
Oh, you're a good fellow, Mr. Baggins.
I will take your offer kindly. If there is anything to note or rouse me, if there should be anything to note, rouse me first, mind you, and I will lie in the inner chamber just not far away. Well, go on then, off you go, said Bilbo. I will wake you at midnight, and you can wake the next watchman. As soon as Bombur had gone, Bilbo put on his ring, fastening his rope, and slipped over the wall, and he was gone. He had about 5 hours before him. Bombur would sleep, and he could sleep at any time, and ever since the adventure in the forest, he was always trying to recapture that beautiful dream he had had since then. And all the others were busy with Thorin. It was unlikely that any, even Fili or Kili, would come out on the wall and wait until it was their turn. It was very dark in the road after a while when he left the newly made path and climbed down towards the lower course of the stream. It was strange to him. At last he came to the bend where he had to cross the water, Now, if he was to make it to the camp as he wished, the bed of the stream was there shallow, but already broad, and fording in the dark was not as easy for the little hobbit. He was nearly across when he missed his footing on a round stone and fell into the cold water with a splash. He could barely scramble. He barely scrambled out onto the far bank, shivering and spluttering, when up came the elves in the gloom with bright lanterns and searched for the cause of the noise. That was no fish, one said.
There's a spy about. Hide your lights. They will keep him. They will help him more than us. If it's that little queer creature, that is said to be their servant.
Servant indeed, snorted Bilbo in the middle of his snort. He sneezed loudly, and the elves immediately gathered towards the sound. Let's have a light, he said. I'm here if you want me, and he slipped off his ring and popped from behind the rock. They seized him quickly in spite of their surprise.
Who are you? Are you the dwarves, Hobbit? What are you doing? How did you get so far past our sentinels?
They asked one after another. I'm Mr. Bilbo Baggins, he answered, companion of Thorin, if you want to know. I know your king well by sight, though perhaps he doesn't know me to look at. But Bard will remember me, and it is Bard I particularly want to see. Indeed, they said.
What may be your business?
Whatever it is my own, my good elves, because if you wish ever to get back to your own woods from this cold, cheerless place, he answered, shivering, you will take me along quick to a fire where I can dry, and then you will let me speak to your chiefs as quickly as may be. I have only 1 or 2 hours to spare. And that is how it came about that some 2 hours after his escape from the gate, Bilbo was sitting beside a warm fire in front of a large tent, and there sat two, gazing curiously at him, both the Elven King and Bard. A hobbit in elvish armour, partially wrapped in an old blanket, was something quite new to them. Really, you know, Bilbo was saying in his best business manner, things are impossible. But personally, I am tired of the whole affair, and I wish I was back in the West, in my home, where folk are more reasonable. But I have an interest in this matter, 1/14 share to be precise, according to a letter which fortunately I believe I have kept. He drew from a pocket in his old jacket, which he still wore over his mail, and crumpled and much folded Thorin's letter that had been under the clock on his mantelpiece in May. A share in the profits, mind you, he went on. I'm aware of that. Personally, I am only too ready to consider all your claims carefully and deduct what is right from the total, putting in my own claim. However, you don't know Thorin Oakenshield as well as I do. Beg your pardon, going back. A share in profits, mind you, he went on. I am aware of that. Personally, I am only too ready to consider all your claims carefully and deduct what is right from the total, putting before you my own claim. However, you don't know Thorin Oakenshield as well as I do now, and I assure you he was quite ready to sit on a heap of gold and starve as long as you sit here. Well, let him, said Bard. Such a fool deserves to starve. Quite so. I see your point of view, and at the same time, winter is coming on fast, and before long you will be having snow and whatnot, and supplies will be difficult, even for elves, I imagine. Also, there will be other difficulties. Have you not heard of Dane and the dwarves of the Iron Hills? We have a long time ago. But that... what has he got to do with us? Asked the king. I thought as much. I see I have information you have not got. Dane, I may tell you, is now less than 2 days' march off, and he has at least 500 grim dwarfs with him. And a good many of them had have great experience in dreadful dwarf and goblin wars, which you have no doubt heard, but when they arrive, they may be serious trouble. Why do you tell us this? Are you betraying your friend? Or are you threatening us? Asked Bard grimly. My dear Bard, squeaked Bilbo. Don't be so hasty. I never met such suspicious folk. I'm merely trying to say, avoid trouble for all concerned. I mean, now I will make you an offer. Let's hear it, they said. Well, you may see it. It is this. And he drew forth the Arkenstone and threw away the wrapping. The elven king himself, whose eyes were used to things of wonder and beauty, stood up in amazement. Even Bard gazed, marvelling at it in silence. It was as if a globe had been filled with moonlight and hung before them in a net woven of the glint of frosty stars. This is the Arkenstone of Thrain, said Bilbo, the heart of the mountain, and it is also the heart of Thorin. He values it above a river of gold. I will give it to you. I will aid you in your bargaining. And then Bilbo, not without a shudder, nor without a glance of longing, handed the marvellous stone to Bard, and he held it in his hand, as though dazed. But how's it yours to give? He asked at last with an effort. Oh, well, said the Hobbit uncomfortably. It isn't exactly, but, well, I'm willing to let it stand against all my claim. Don't you know, I may be a burglar, or so they say, but personally I never really felt like one. I am an honest one, I hope, more or less. Anyway, I'm going back now, and the dwarves can do what they like to me. I just hope that you find this useful. The Elven King looked at Bilbo with a new wonder. Bilbo Baggins, he said, you are more worthy to wear the armour of elf princes than many that have looked more comely in it. But I wonder if Thorin Oakenshield will see it so. I have more knowledge of the dwarves in general than you have, perhaps. I advise you to remain with us, and here you shall be honoured and thrice welcome. Thank you very much, I am sure, said Bilbo with a bow. But I don't think I ought to leave my friends like this. After all we have gone through together. And I promised to wake Bomber at midnight, and really I must be going. Thank you. Quickly. Nothing they could say would stop him. So an escort was provided for him as he went. Both the king and Bard saluted him with honour, and they passed through the camp. As they passed through the camp, an old man wrapped in a dark cloak rose from a tent door where he was sitting and came towards him. Well done, Mr. Baggins, he said, clapping Bilbo on the back. There is always more about you than anyone expects. It was Gandalf. For the first time for many a day, Bilbo was really delighted. There was no time for all the questions that he immediately wished to ask. Oh, all in good time, said Gandalf. Things are drawn towards the end now, unless I am mistaken. There is an unpleasant time just in front of you, but keep your heart up. You may come through all right. There is news brewing that even the ravens have not heard. Good night. Puzzled but cheered, Bilbo hurried on. He was guided to a safe ford and set across dry, and he then said farewell to the elves and climbed carefully back towards the gate. Great weariness began to come over him, but it was well before midnight when he clambered back up the rope again. It was still there when he had left it, and he untied it and hid it, and then he sat down on the wall and wondered anxiously what would happen next. At midnight he woke up Bomber, and then in turn rolled himself up into a corner without listening to the old dwarf's thanks, which he felt that he had hardly earned, and he was soon fast asleep, forgetting all his worries till the morning. As a matter of fact, he was dreaming of eggs and bacon. Chapter 17. The clouds burst. Next day the trumpets rang early in the camp. Soon a single runner was seen hurrying along a narrow path. At a distance he stood and hailed them, asking whether Thorin would now listen to another embassy, since new tidings had come and matters were changed.
That will be Dane, said Thorin when he heard. They will have got wind of his coming. I thought that would alter their mood. Bid them come few in number and weaponless, and I will hear, he called to the messenger.
About midday the banners of the forest and the lake were seen to be borne forth again. A company of 20 was approaching, and at the beginning of the narrow way they laid aside swords and spears and came towards the gate. Wondering, the dwarves saw among them that they were both Bard and the Elven King, before whom an old man wrapped in a cloak and hood bore a strong casket of iron-bound wood.
Hail, Thorin,
said Bard. Are you still of the same mind?
My mind does not change with the rising and setting of a few suns, answered Thorin. Did you come to ask me idle questions? Still, the elf host has not departed as I bade. Till then, you come in vain to bargain with me. Is there nothing for which you will yield any of your gold? Nothing that you or any of your friends have to offer.
What about the Arkenstone of Thrain? He said. And at that same moment the old man opened the casket and held aloft the jewel. The light leapt from his hand, bright and white in the morning. And then Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. No one spoke for a long while. Thorin was stricken dumb with amazement and confusion. Thorin at length broke the silence, and his voice was thick with wrath.
That stone was my father's, and it is mine. Why should I purchase my own? Why should I wonder? Oh, but wonder overcame him, and he added, but how came you of the heirloom of my house? If there is need to ask such a question of thieves.
We are not thieves, Bard answered. You own. We will give back in return for our own.
How came you by it?
I gave it to them, squeaked Bilbo, who was peering over the wall now in dreadful fright.
You,
cried Thorin, turning upon him and grasping him with both hands. You miserable hobbit, you undersized burglar, he shouted at a loss for words, and he shook poor Bilbo like a rabbit. By the beard of Durin, I wish I had Gandalf here.
Curse him for his choices if you made his beard wither. As for you, I will throw you into the rocks!
And he cried, and he lifted Bilbo in his arms.
Stay, your wish is granted, said a voice.
The old man with the casket threw aside his hood and cloak.
Here is Gandalf, and none too soon, it seems. And if you don't like my burglar, please do not damage him. Put him down and listen first to what he has to say.
You're in league, said Thorin, dropping Bilbo on the top of the wall. Never again will I have dealings with any wizard or any of his friends.
What have you to say, you descendant of rats?
Dear me, said Bilbo. I am sure this is all very uncomfortable, but you may remember saying that I may choose my own 14th share. Perhaps I took it too literally. I have told the dwarves that dwarves are sometimes politer in words than in deed, and that the time was all the same when you seemed to think that I've been of some service to descendants of rats, indeed. Is this all the service of your family that I was promised, Thorin? To take it that I have disposed of my share as I wished, and let it go at that?
I will, said Thorin grimly, and I will let you go at that, and may we never meet again.
And then he turned and spoke over the wall.
I am betrayed, he said. It was rightly guessed that I could not forbear to redeem the Arkenstone, the treasure of my house, for I will give 1/14th share of the hoard in silver and gold, setting aside the gems. But that shall be accounted but the promised share of this traitor, and with that reward he shall depart. And you can divide it as you will. He will get little enough, I doubt not. Take him, if you wish him to live, and no friendship of mine goes with him.
Get down now.
To your friends, he said to Bilbo, or I will throw you down.
What about the gold and the silver? Asked Bilbo.
That shall follow after. As can be arranged, he said. Get down.
Until then, we keep the stone, said Bard.
You are not making a very splendid figure as king under the mountain, said Gandalf. But things may change yet.
They may indeed, said Thorin, and already so strong was the bewilderment of the treasure upon him that he was pondering whether, by the help of Dane, he might not recapture the Arkenstone and withhold a share of his reward. And so Bilbo was swung down from the wall and departed with nothing, for all his trouble, except the armour which Thorin had already given him. More than one of the dwarves in their hearts felt shame and pity at his going. Farewell, he cried to them. May we meet again as friends.
Be off, called Thorin. You have mail upon you, which is made by my folk, and it is too good for you, and it cannot be pierced by arrows. But if you do not hasten, I will sting your miserable feet, so be swift.
Not so hasty, said Bard. We will give you until tomorrow. At noon we will return and see if you have brought from the hoard the portion that is to be set against the stone. If that is done without deceit, then we will depart, and the elf host will go back to the forest. In the meantime, farewell. And with that they went back to the camp. But Thorin sent messengers by Roak, telling Dane of what had passed, and bidding him to come with wary speed. That day passed and night. The next day the wind shifted west, and the air was dark and gloomy. The morning was still early when a cry was heard in the camp. Runners came in to report that a host of dwarfs had appeared round the eastern spur of the mountain and was now hastening to Dale.
Dane had come.
He had hurried on through the night, so he had come up sooner to them than they had expected. Each one of his folk was clad in the hauberk of the steel mail that hung to his knees, and his legs were covered with hose of fine and flexible metal mesh, and secret of those of whose making was possessed by Dane's people. The dwarves were exceedingly strong for their height, but most of these were strong even for dwarves. In battle they wielded heavy two-handed mattocks, but each of them also had a broad sword at his side and a round shield slung at his back. Their beards were forked and plaited and thrust into their belts. Their caps of iron, and they were shod with iron, and their faces were grim. Trumpets called the men and elves to arms. Before long, the dwarves could be seen coming up the valley at a great pace. They halted between the river and the eastern spur, but a few held on their way, and crossing the river drew near the camp, and there they laid down their weapons and held up their hands in signs of peace. Bard went out to meet them, and with them went Bilbo.
We are sent from Dane, son of Nain, they said when he questioned. We are hastening to our kinsmen in the mountain, since we learned that the kingdom of the old is renewed. But who are you that sit in the plain as foes before defended walls?
This, of course, is the polite and rather old-fashioned language of such occasions, meant simply,
you have no business here, we're going on, so make way or we will fight you.
And then they meant to push on between the mountain and the loop of the river, for the narrow land did not seem to be strongly guarded. Bard, of course, refused to allow the dwarves to go straight onto the mountain. He was determined to wait until the gold and silver had been brought out in exchange for the Arkenstone, for he did not believe this would be done if once the fortress was manned with so large and warlike a company. They had brought with them a great store of supplies, for dwarves can carry very heavy burdens, and nearly all of Dane's folk, in spite of their rapid march, bore huge packs. huge packs on their backs in addition to their weapons. They would stand siege for weeks, and by that time yet more dwarves might come, and yet more, for Thorin had many, many relatives. Also, they would be able to reopen and guard some other gate, so that the besiegers would have to circle the whole mountain, and for that they had not sufficient members. These were, in fact, precisely their plans, for raven messengers had been busy between Thorin and Dane. But for the moment the way was barred, so after angry words the dwarf messengers retired, muttering in their beards. Bards then sent messengers at once to the gate, but they found no gold or payment. Arrows came forth as soon as they were within shot, and they hastened back in dismay. In the camp all was now astir, as if for battle, for the dwarves of Dane were advancing along the eastern bank. Fools, fools, laughed Bard, to come thus beneath the mountain's arms. They do not understand war above ground, when, whatever they may know of battles in the mines. There are many of our archers and spearmen now hidden in the rocks upon their right flank. Dwarf mail may be good, but soon they will be hard put to it. Let us set on them from both sides now before they're fully rested. But the Elven King said, Long will I tarry ere I begin this war for gold. Dwarves cannot pass us unless we do anything that we cannot mark. Let us hope still for something that will bring reconciliation. Our advantages in numbers will be enough, if in the end it must come to unhappy blows. But he reckoned without the dwarves. The knowledge that the Arkenstone was in the hands of the besiegers burned in their thoughts. Also they guessed the hesitation of Bard and his friends, and resolved to strike while they debated. Suddenly, without a signal, they sprang silently forward to attack. Bows twanged and arrows whistled. The battle was about to be joined. Still more suddenly, a darkness came on with dreadful swiftness. A black cloud hurried over the sky. Winter thunder on a wild wind rolled roaring up and rumbled in the mountain, and lightning at its peak. And beneath the thunder, another blackness could be seen whirling forward, but it did not come from the wind. It came from the north, like a vast cloud of birds, so dense that no light could be seen between their wings. Halt! Cried Gandalf, who appeared suddenly, and stood alone with arms uplifted between the advancing dwarves and the ranks awaiting them. Halt! He cried, a voice like thunder. He called a voice like thunder. His staff blazed forth with a flash like lightning. Dread has come upon you all. Alas, it has come more swiftly than I guessed. The goblins are upon you. Bold of the north is coming, O Dane, whose father you slew in Moria. Behold the bats above. Above his army like a sea of locusts. They ride upon wolves, and wargs are in their train. Amazement and confusion fell upon them all. Even as Gandalf had been speaking, the darkness grew. The dwarves halted and gazed up at the sky. The elves cried out with many voices. Come, called out Gandalf. There is yet time for counsel. Let Dane, son of Nain, come swiftly to us. So began a battle that none had expected. It was called the Battle of the Five Armies, and it was very terrible. Upon one side were the goblins and the wild wolves, and on the other side were elves and men and dwarves. And this is how it fell out. Ever since the fall of the great goblin of the Misty Mountains, the hatred for the race of dwarves had been rekindled to fury. Messengers had come to pass to and fro between all their cities, colonies, and strongholds, for they resolved now to win the dominion of the north. Tidings they had gathered in secret ways in all the mountains. There was a forging and an arming. They then marched and gathered by hill and valley, going ever by tunnel under dark, until around and beneath the great mountain of Gundabad of the North, where there was their capital, a vast host was assembled to sweep, ready to sweep in time of storm, unawares upon the south. And then they learned of the death of Smaug, and the joy was in their hearts, and they hastened night after night through the mountains, and came thus on the last sun from the north hard on the Hales of Dane. Not even the ravens knew of their coming until they came out of the broken lands which divided the lonely mountain from the hills behind. How much Gandalf knew cannot be said, but it is plain that they had not been expected, and had not expected this sudden assault. This is the plan that he made in the council with the Elven King and with Bard and with Dane, for the dwarf lord now joined them. The goblins were the foes of all, and at their coming all quarrels were forgotten. Their only hope was to lure the goblins into the valley between the arms of the mountains, and themselves to man the great spurs that struck south and east. Yet this would be perilous if the goblins were in sufficient numbers to overrun the mountain itself and so attack them from behind and above. But there was also no time to make any other plan or summon any help. Soon the thunder passed, rolling away to the southeast, but the bat cloud came flying lower over shoulder of the mountain and whirled above them, shutting out the light and filling them with dread. "To the mountain," called Bard. "To the mountain, let us take our places while there's still time yet." On the south spur, in its lower slopes, and in the east, in the rocks at its feet, the elves were set on the eastern spur, as were the men and dwarves. But Bard and some of the nimblest of men and elves climbed up to the highest of the eastern shoulder to gain a new view to the north. Soon they could see the lands before the mountains, feet black with a hurrying multitude. Ere long the vanguard swirled around the spurs and came rushing into Dale. These were the swiftest wolf riders, and already their cries and howls rent the air afar. A few brave men were strung before them to make a faint resistance, and many of them fell before the rest drew back and fled to either side. As Gandalf had hoped, the goblin army had gathered behind the resisted vanguard and poured down now in a rage into the valley, driving wildly up between the two arms of the mountain, seeking the foe. Their banners were countless, black and red, and they came like a tide in a fury and disorder. It was a terrible battle, the most of all Bilbo's experiences, and one which at the time he hated the most, which is to say it was one of the most he was proud of and most fond of recalling afterwards, although it was quite important in it. He was quite unimportant in it. Actually, I may say that he put on his ring early in the business and vanished from sight, if not from all danger. A magic ring of that sort is not a complete protection in goblin charge, nor does it stop flying arrows and wild spears, but it does help in getting out of the way and prevents from your head being especially chosen for a sweeping stroke by a goblin swordsman. The elves were the first to charge. Their hatred for the goblins is cold and bitter. Their spears and swords shone in the gloom with gleam of chill flame. So deadly was the wrath of hands that held them. As soon as the host of their enemies was dense in the valley, they sent against it a shower of arrows, and each flickered as it fled, as if with stinging fire. Behind the arrows, 1,000 of their spearmen leapt down and charged. The yells were deafening. The rocks were stained black with goblin blood. Just as the goblins were recovering from the onslaught, the elf charge was halted. There rose from across the valley a deep-throated war, with the cries of "Moria" and "Dane, Dane!" The dwarves of the Iron Hills plunged in, wielding their mattocks upon the other side, and beside them came the men of the lake with the long swords. Panic came among the goblins. And even as they turned to meet this new attack, the elves charged again with renewed numbers. Already many of the goblins were flying back down to the river to escape the trap. Many of them, their own wolves, were turning upon them and rending them dead and wounded. Victory seemed at hand when a cry rang out from the heights above. Goblins had scaled the mountains from the other side, and already many were on the slopes above the gate, and others were streaming down recklessly, heedless of those that fell screaming from cliff and precipice to attack the spurs from above. Each of these could be reached by paths that run down the main mass of the mountain in the centre, and the defenders had too few to bar the way for long. Victory now vanished from hope. They had only stemmed the first onslaught of the black tide. Day drew on. The goblins gathered again in the valley. There a host of wargs came ravening in with them. They came the bodyguard of Bolg, goblins of huge size with scimitars of steel. Soon actual darkness was coming into a stormy sky, whilst still great bats swirled about the heads and the ears of elves and men, or fastened vampire-like onto the stricken. And now Bard was fighting to defend the eastern spur, yet giving slowly back as the elf lords were at the bay about their king upon the southern arm, near to the watchpost on Ravenhill. Suddenly there was a great shout from the gate, and from the gate came a trumpet call. They had forgotten Thorin. Part of the wall, moved by levers, fell out with a crash into the pool. Out leapt the king under the mountain, and his companions followed him. Hood and cloak were gone. They were in shining armour, and red light leapt from their eyes. In the gloom, the great dwarf gleamed like gold in a dying fire. Rocks were hurled down from on high by the goblins above, but they held on and leapt down on to the fall's foot and rushed forward into the battle. Wolf and rider fell or fled from them, Thorin wielding his axe with mighty strokes, and nothing seemed to harm him. To me, elves and men, to me, oh my kinsmen, kinsfolk, he cried. His voice shook like a horn in the valley. Down, heedless of order, rushed all the dwarves of Dane to his help. Down, too, came many of the lake men, for Bard could not restrain them, and out of the other side came many of the spearmen of the elves. Once again, the goblins were stricken in the valley. They were piled heaps until Dale was dark and hideous with their corpses. The wargs were scattered, and Thorin drove right against the body of Bolg. He could not pierce their ranks. Already behind him, among the goblin dead, lay many men and many dwarves, and many fair elf that should have lived long ages merrily in the wood. And as the valley widened, his onset grew even slower. His numbers were too few. His flanks were unguarded, and soon the attackers were attacked, and they were forced into the great ring, facing every way, hemmed in all about by goblins and wolves returning to the assault. The bodyguard of Bolg came howling against them and drove in upon their ranks like waves upon cliffs of sand. Their friends could not help them from the assault from the mountains, for the assault from the mountain was renewed with redoubled force, and upon each side men and elves were being slowly beaten down. On all this Bilbo looked with misery. He had taken his stand on Ravenhill among the elves, partly because there was more chance of escape from that point, and partly with the more tookish part of his mind, because if he was going to be the last in a desperate stand, he preferred on the whole to defend the Elven King. Gandalf too, I may say, was there, sitting on the ground as if in deep thought, preparing, I suppose, some last blast of magic before the end. That did not seem far off. It will not be long now, thought Bilbo, before the goblins win the gate, and we are all slaughtered, or driven down and captured. Really, it is enough to make one weep after all one has gone through. I would rather old Smaug had been left with all the wretched treasure than these vile creatures should get it, and poor old Bombur and Balin and Fili and Killy and all the rest come to a bad end, and Bard too, and the lake men and the merry elves. Oh, misery me. I have heard songs of many battles, and I have always understood that defeat may be glorious. It seems very uncomfortable, not to say distressing. I wish I was well out of it. The clouds were torn by the wind, and a red sunset slashed the west. Seeing the sudden gleam in the gloom, Bilbo looked around, and he gave a great cry. He had seen a sight that made his heart leap. Dark shapes, small and yet majestic against the glow, the distant glow. The eagles! The eagles! He shouted. The eagles are coming! Bilbo's eyes were seldom wrong. The eagles were coming down the wind, line after line, in such a host as must have gathered gathered from all of the Eries of the north. The eagles! The eagles! Bilbo cried, dancing, waving his arms. If the elves could not see him, they could hear him. Soon they took up the cry as it echoed across the valley. Many wondering eyes looked up, though as yet nothing could be seen except from the southern shoulders of the mountain. The eagles! Shouted Bilbo, crying once more, but at that moment a stone hurling from above smote heavily on his helm and fell with a crash and knew no more. Chapter 18. The Return Journey. When Bilbo came to himself, he was literally by himself. He was lying on the flat stones of Raven Hill. No one was near. A cloudless day, but cold, was broad above him. He was shaking and as chilled as stone, but his head was burning with fire. I wonder what has happened, he said to himself. At any rate, I'm not yet one of the fallen heroes, but I suppose there is still time for that. He sat up painfully, looking into the valley, and he could see no living goblins. After a while, his head cleared a little, and thought he could see elves moving in the rocks below. He rubbed his eyes, and surely there was a camp still in the plains, some distance off, and there was coming and going about the gate, and dwarves seemed to be busy in removing the wall, but all was deadly still. There was no call, and no echo of a song. Sorrow seemed to be in the air. Victory after all, I suppose, he said, feeling his aching head. Well, it seems a very gloomy business. Suddenly he was aware of a man climbing up towards him. Hello there, he called with a shaky voice. Hello there. Is it what news? What is that speaks among the stones? Said that man, halting and peering about him not far from where Bilbo sat. And then Bilbo remembered his ring. Oh, well, I am blessed. Oh, this invisibility has its drawbacks after all. Otherwise, I suppose I might have spent a warm, comfortable night in bed. It's me! It's me! It's Bilbo Baggins, the company of Thorin! He cried before hurriedly taking his ring off. It is well I have found you, said the man, striding forward. You are needed, and we have looked for you for so long. You would have been numbered among the dead, who are many, if Gandalf the wizard had not said that your voice it was, last heard in this place. I have been sent to look here for the last time. Are you much hurt? A nasty knock on my head, I think, said Bilbo, but I have a helm and, a hard skull, and all the same I feel sick and my legs are like straws. Well, I will carry you down to the camp in the valley, said the man, picked him up lightly. The man was swift and sure-footed. It was not long before Bilbo was set down before a tent in Dale, and there stood Gandalf, with his arm in a sling. Even the wizard had not escaped without a wound, and there were a few unarmed in all the host. When Gandalf saw Bilbo, he was delighted. Oh, Baggins, he exclaimed, well, I'm alive after all. I am glad. I began to wonder if even your luck would see through terrible business. Terrible. It was nearly disastrous, but the other news can wait. Come, he said more gravely. You are called for. And leading the hobbit, he took him within the tent. Hail, he said as he entered. I brought it. And there indeed laid Thorin Oakenshield, wounded with many wounds, and his rent armour and a notched axe were cast upon the floor, and he looked up at Bilbo as he came beside him. Farewell, good thief, he said. I go now to the halls of waiting to sit beside my fathers until the world is renewed, since I leave all now, all gold and silver, and go from where it is of little worth. I wish to part in friendship from you, and I would take back the words, my words and deeds, from up at the gate. Bilbo knelt down on one knee, filled with sorrow. Farewell, King under the mountain, he said. This is a better adventure, if it must end so, and not a mountain of gold can amend it yet. I am glad that I have shared in your perils. And that is more than any Baggins deserves. No, said Thorin, this is more. There is more in you, of good than you know, child of the kindly West. Some courage and some wisdom blended in measure. It's more of us value food and cheer and song above hoarded gold. It would be a merrier world. Be sad or merry, but sad or merry I must leave you now. Farewell. And then Bilbo turned away and went by himself, and he sat alone, wrapped in a blanket. And whether you believe it or not, he wept until his eyes were red and his voice was hoarse. He was a kindly little soul. Indeed, it was long before he had the attack. It was long before he had the heart to make a joke again. The mercy it is, he said to himself, that I woke up when I did. I wish Thorin were living, but I'm glad that we parted in kindness. Fool Bilbo Baggins, you made a great mess of that business with the stone, and there was quite a battle in spite of all your efforts to buy peace and quiet, but, well, I suppose that you can hardly be blamed for that. All that had happened after he was stunned, Bilbo learned later, but it gave him more sorrow than joy, and he was now wary of his adventure. He was aching in his bones for the homeward journey. That however he was a little delayed, so in the meantime I will tell you some of the events. The eagles had long suspicion of the goblins mustering. From their watchfulness, the movements in the mountains could not all be together hid. So they too had gathered in numbers under the great eagle of the misty mountains, and at length, smelling the battle from afar, they had come speeding down the gale in the nick of time. Then it was who dislodged the goblins from the mountain slopes, casting them over the precipices or driving them down by shrieking and bewildering their foes. It was not long before they had freed the lonely mountain, and the elves and the men on either side of the valley could come at last to the help of the battle below. Even with the eagles, they were still outnumbered. In the last hour, Bjorn himself had appeared. No one knew from where he came, but he came alone and in bear's shape, and he seemed to have grown almost to giant size in his wrath. The roar of his voice was like drums and guns, and the tossed wolves and goblins from the path like straws and feathers. He fell upon their rear and broke like a clap of thunder through the ring. The dwarves were making a still stand about their lords upon a low rounded hill, and then Bjorn stooped and lifted Thorin, who had fallen pierced with spears, and bore him out of the fray. Swiftly he returned with his wrath, and was redoubled so nothing could withstand him, and no weapon seemed to bite upon him, and he scattered the bodyguard and pulled Bolg down himself and crushed him. Then dismay fell upon the goblins, and they fled in all directions, but weariness left their enemies with the coming of new hope, and they pursued them closely and prevented them from escaping where they could. They drove many of them to the running river, and as such fled south or west, and they hunted into the marshes about the forest river, and there the greater part of the last fugitives perished, whilst those that came to the wood elf realms were there slain or drawn to die deep in the trackless dark of Mirkwood. Songs have said that 3 parts of the goblin wars to the north perished on that day, and that mountains had peace for many a year. Victory had been assured before the fall of night, but the pursuit was still on foot when Bilbo returned to the camp, and not many were in the valley, save the more grievously wounded.
"Where are the eagles?"
"Where are the eagles?" he asked Gandalf that evening, as he lay wrapped in many warm blankets.
"Some are in the hut," said the wizard, "but most have gone back to their eyries. They would not stay here, and departed with the first light of morning. Dane has crowned their chief with gold, and sworn friendship with them forever."
"I am sorry. I should like to have seen them again," said Bilbo sleepily. "Perhaps I shall see them again on the way home. I suppose we should and shall be going home soon."
"As soon as you like," said the wizard.
Actually, it was some days before Bilbo really set out. They buried Thorin deep beneath the mountain, and Bard laid the Arkenstone upon his breast. "There, let it lie till the mountain falls," he said. "May it bring good fortune to all his folk that dwell hereafter." Upon his tomb the Elven King then laid Orcrist and the elvish sword that had been taken from Thorin in captivity. It is said in songs that it gleamed ever in the dark if foes ever approached, and the fortress of the dwarves could not be taken by surprise. There now Dane, son of Nain, took up his abode and became the king under the mountain, and in time many other dwarves gathered to the throne in the ancient halls. Of the 12 companions of Thorin, 10 remained. Fili and Kili had fallen, defending him with their shield and body, for he was their mother's elder brother. The others remained with Dane, for Dane dealt his treasure well. There was, of course, no longer any question of dividing the hoard in such shares as planned to Balin and Dwalin and Dorian, Ori and Oin and Gloin and Bifur and Boffer, or to Bilbo, yet a 14th share of silver and gold, wrought and unwrought, was given to Bard. For Dane said,
"We will honour the agreement of the dead, and now he has the Arkenstone in his keeping."
Even a 14th share was wealth exceedingly great, greater than many of the mortal kings. From that treasure, Bard sent down much gold to the master of Lake Town, and he rewarded his followers and friends freely. To the Elven King he gave the emeralds of Girion, such jewels as most he loved, which Dane restored to him. To Bilbo he said,
"This treasure is as much yours as mine, though
the old agreements cannot stand, since so many have a claim in winning and defence. Yet even though you are willing to lay aside all your claim, I should wish that the words of Thorin, which you repented, should not prove true, and that we should give you a little. I would reward you most richly of all." "Well, that's very kind of you," said Bilbo. "But really it is a relief to me. How on earth should I have got all that treasure home without war and murder all along the way? I don't know, and I don't know what I would have done with it. And when I got home, I'm sure it's better in your hands." in the end he would only take 2 small chests filled with silver, the other with gold, such as a strong pony could carry, and that'll be quite enough, as I can manage, he said. And at last the time came for him to say goodbye to his friends. Farewell, Balin, he said, and farewell, Dwalin, and farewell, Dorri, and Norri, and Ori, and Oin, Gloin, Biffa, Boffa, and Bomba. May your beards never grow thin. And turning towards the mountain, he added, farewell, Thorin Oakenshield, and Filly and Killy, may your memory never fade. And then the dwarfs bowed low before their gate, but the words stuck in their throats. Goodbye. Good luck. Wherever you fare, said Balin at last, if you ever visit us again. When our halls are made fair once more, then the feast shall indeed be splendid. Well, if you're ever passing my way, said Bilbo, don't wait to knock. Tea is at 4, but any of you are welcome at any time. And then he turned away. The elf host was on the march, and if it was sadly lessened, yet many were glad, for now the northern world would be merrier for many a long day. The dragon was dead, and the goblins overthrown, and their hearts looked forward after winter to a spring of joy. Gandalf and Bilbo rode behind the Elven King, and beside them strode Beorn, once again in man's shape, and he laughed and sang in a loud voice upon the road. So they went on until they drew nearer to the borders of Mirkwood, to the North Palace where the forest river ran out. When they halted, for the wizard and Bilbo would not enter the wood, even though the king bade them to stay a while in the halls. They intended to go along the edge of the forest, around its northern end, and in the waste that lay between it and the beginning of the Grey Mountains. It was a long and cheerless road, but now the goblins were crushed, it seemed safer to them, and the dreadful pathways under the trees, and safer than the dreadful pathways under the trees. Moreover, Beorn was going that way too.
Farewell, Elven King, said Gandalf. Merry be the greenwood, while the world is yet young, and merry be your folk.
Farewell, O Gandalf, said the king. May you ever appear where you are most needed and least expected. The oftener you appear in my halls, the better I shall be pleased. I beg of you, said Bilbo, stammering and standing on one foot, to accept this gift. And he brought out a necklace of silver and pearls that Dane had given him at their parting. In what way have I earned such a gift, O Hobbit? Said the king. Well, I thought, I don't know, don't you know, said the Hobbit, rather confused, that some little return should be made for your hospitality? I mean, even a burglar has his feelings. I have drunk so much of your wine and eaten so much of your bread.
I will take your gift, O Bilbo the Magnificent, said the king gravely, and I name you elf friend and blessed. May your shadow never grow less, or stealing be too easy. Farewell.
Then the elves turned towards the forest, and Bilbo stared on his long road home. He had had many hardships and adventures before he got back. The wild was still the wild, and there were many other things in it in those days beside goblins, and he was well guided and well guarded. The wizard was with him, and Beorn too, for much of the way, and he was never in great danger again. Anyway, by midwinter, Gandalf and Bilbo had come all the way back along both edges of the forest to the doors of Beorn's house, and there for a while they both stayed. Yuletide was warm and merry there, and the men came from far and wide to feast at Beorn's bidding. The goblins of the Misty Mountains were now few and terrified and hidden in the deepest holes they could find, and the wargs had vanished from the woods, so that the men went abroad without fear. Beorn indeed became a great chief afterwards and in those regions, and ruled a wide land between the mountains and the wood. And it is said that for many generations the men of his line had the power of taking the bear's shape. Some were grim men and bad, but most were in heart like Beorn, if less in size and strength. In their day, the last goblins were hunted from the misty mountains, and a new peace came over the edge of the wild. It was spring, and a fair one, with mild weathers and a bright sun, before Bilbo and Gandalf took their leave at last of Beorn. And though he longed for home, Bilbo left with regret, for the flowers of the gardens of Beorn were in springtime no less marvellous than in high summer. At last they came upon the long road and reached the very pass where the goblins had captured them before. But they came to that high point that morning and looked backward and saw the white sun shining over the outstretched lands. And there behind lay Mirkwood, blue in the distance and darkly green at the nearer edge, even in the spring. But there, far away, was the lonely mountain on the edge of eyesight. One of its highest peaks, snow, yet unmelted, was gleaming pale. So comes snow after fire, and even dragons have their ending, said Bilbo, and he turned his back on his adventure. The Tookish part was getting very tired, and the Baggins was daily getting stronger. I wish now only to be in my own armchair, he said. Chapter 19. The Last Stage. It was on May the 1st that the two came back at last to the brink of the valley of Rivendell, where stood the last, or the first, homely house. Again it was evening. Their ponies were tired, especially the one that carried baggage, and they all felt in need of rest. And they rode down a steep path, and Bilbo heard the elves still singing in the trees, as if they had not stopped since he left. And soon as the riders came down into the lower glades of the woods, they burst into a song, much the same as they had before. And this is something like this. The dragon is withered, his bones are now crumbled, his armour is shivered, his splendour is humbled. Though sword shall be rusted, and throne and crown perish, with strength that men trusted, and wealth that they cherish, here grass is still growing, and leaves are still singing, the white water flowing, and elves are still singing. Come tra-la-la-la-lee, come back to the valley. The stars are far brighter than gems without measure. The moon is far whiter than silver in treasure. The fire is more shining on hearth in the gloaming than gold won by mining, so why go a-roaming? Oh, tra-la-la-la-lee, come back to the valley. Oh, where are you going, so late in returning? The river is flowing, the stars are all burning. Oh, weather so late and so sad and so dreary. Here elf and elf maiden now welcome the weary. With tra-la-la-la-lee, come back to the valley. Tra-la-la-la-lee, fa-la-la-la-lee, fa-la. Then the elves of the valley came out and greeted them and led them across the water to the house of Elrond. And there was a warm welcome that was made. And there were many eager ears that evening to hear the tale of their adventures. Gandalf it was who spoke, for Bilbo had fallen quite quiet and drowsy. Most of the tale he knew, for he had been in it, and he had himself told much of it to the wizard on their way home, or outside, or in the house of Beorn. But every now and again he would open one eye and listen when a part of the story which he did not know yet came in. It was in this way that he learned where Gandalf had been to, for he overheard the words of the wizard to Elrond. It appeared that Gandalf had been to a great council of white wizards masters of law and good magic, and they had at last driven the necromancer from his dark hole in the south of Mirkwood. "Ere long now," Gandalf was saying, "the forest will grow somewhat more wholesome. The north will be freed of that horror for many long years, I hope. Yet I wish you were banished from the world." It would be well indeed," said Elrond, "but I fear that will not come about in this age of the world, or for many after." And when the tale of their journeyings was told, there were other tales, yet more tales, tales of long ago, and tales of new things, and tales of no time at all, till Bilbo's head fell forward on his chest, and he snored comfortably in a corner. He woke to find himself on a white bed, and the moon shining through an open window. Below it, many elves were singing loud and clear on the banks of the stream. "Sing all ye joyful now all together, the winds in the treetop, the winds in the heather. So the stars are in blossom, the moon is in flower, and bright are the windows of night in her tower. Dance all ye joyful now, dance all together. Soft is the grass, and let foot be like feather. The river is silver, the shadows are fleeting. Merry is Maytime, our merry is meeting. Sing we now softly, the dreams leave us, weave him. Wind him in slumber, and let there us leave him. The wanderer sleepeth, now soft be his pillow. Lullaby, lullaby, alder and willow. Sigh no more, pine, till the wind of the morn. Full moon, dark be the land. Hush, hush, oak, ash, and thorn. Hush be all water, till dawn is at hand." "Well, merry people," said Bilbo, looking out, what time by the moon is this? Your lullaby would waken a drunken goblin, yet I thank you." "And your snores would waken the stone dragon, yet we thank you." And they answered with laughter, "It is drawing towards dawn, and you have slept now since the night's beginning. Tomorrow, perhaps, you will be cured of weariness." "Well, a little sleep does a great cure in the house of Elrond," said he, "but I will take all the cure I can get. A second good night, fair friends." And with that, he went back to bed, and he slept till the next morning. Weariness fell from him soon in that house, and he had many a merry jest and dance, early and late, with the elves of the valley. Yet that place could not delay him now, and he thought always of his own home. And after a week, therefore, he said farewell to Elrond, giving him such small gifts that he would accept, and he rode away with Gandalf. Even as they left the valley, and the sky darkened in the west before them, the wind and the rain came up to meet them. "Oh, merry is Maytime," said Bilbo, as the rain beat into his face, "but our back is to legends, and we are coming home. I suppose this is the first taste of it." "There is a long road ahead," said Gandalf, "but yet this is the last road." They came to the river that marked the very edge of the borderland of the wild, and the ford beneath the steep bank, which you may remember. The water was swollen with both with the melting of the snows and the approach of the summer, and with day-long rain, but they crossed with some difficulty and pressed forward as evening fell on the last stage of their journey. This was much as it had been before, except that the company was smaller and more silent, and also this time there were no trolls. At each point on the road, Bilbo recalled the happenings and the words of a year ago. It seemed to him more like 10, so that of course he quickly noted the place where the pony had fallen in the river, and they had turned aside for their nasty adventure with Tom and Bert and Bill. And not far from the road they found the gold from the trolls, which they had buried, still hidden and untouched. I have enough to last me time," said Bilbo, when they had dug it up. You had better take this, Gandalf. I dare say that you can find use for it.
Indeed I can, said the wizard, but share and share alike, you may find you have more needs than you expect.
So they put the gold in the bags and slung them on the ponies, who were not at all pleased about it. After all, they were going slower for most of the time that they walked, but the land was green and there was much grass, which the hobbit strolled along contentedly, and he mopped his face with a red silk handkerchief. No, not a single one of his own had survived. He had just borrowed this one from Elrond. For now June had brought summer, and the weather was bright and hot again. As all things come to an end, even this story, a day came at last when they were in the sight of the country where Bilbo had been born and bred, where the shapes of the land and of the trees were as well known to him as his hands and his toes. Coming to a rise, he could see his own hill, and in the distance he stopped and suddenly said, "Roads go ever, ever on, over rock and under tree, by caves where never sun has shone, by streams that never find the sea, over snow by winter's sun, and through the merry flowers of June, over grass and over stone, and under mountains in the moon. Roads go ever, ever on, under cloud and under star, yet feet that wandering have gone turn at last to home afar. Eyes that fire and sword have seen, and horror in the halls of stone, look at last on meadows green, and trees and hills they long have known." And Gandalf looked at him.
"My dear Bilbo," he said, "something is the matter with you. You are not the hobbit that you were."
And so they crossed the bridge, and they passed the mill by the river, and they came back to Bilbo's own door. "Bless me, what is going on?" he cried. There was a great commotion. People of all sorts, respectable and unrespectable, were thick around the door. Many were going in and out, not even wiping their feet on the mat, as Bilbo noticed with annoyance. If he was surprised, they were more surprised still. He had arrived back in the middle of an auction. There was a large note in black, hung on the gate, stating that on June the 22nd, Messrs. Grubb, and Burrows would sell by auction the effects of the late Bilbo Baggins, Esquire, of Bag End, Underhill, Hobbiton. Sale to commence at 10 o'clock sharp, and it was now nearly lunchtime, and most of the things had already been sold for various prices, from next to nothing to old songs, as is not unusual at auctions. Oh, Bilbo's cousins, the Sackville Bagginses, were in fact busy measuring his rooms to see if their own furniture would fit. In short, Bilbo was presumed dead, and not everybody, that said, was sorry to find the presumption wrong. The return of Mr. Bilbo Baggins created quite a disturbance, both under the hill and over the hill, and across the water, and it was a great deal more than a 9 days' wonder. The legal bother indeed lasted for years. It was quite a long time before Mr. Baggins was, in fact, admitted to be alive again. The people who had specifically got good bargains at the sale took a deal of convincing, and in the end, to save time, Bilbo had to buy back quite a lot of his own furniture. Many of his silver spoons had mysteriously disappeared, and they were never accounted for. Personally, he suspected the Sackville Bagginses. On their side, they never admitted that the returned Baggins was genuine. They were not on friendly terms with Bilbo ever after. They really wanted to live in his nice hobbit hole so very much. Indeed, Bilbo found he had lost more than spoons. He had lost his reputation. It is true that forever after he remained an elf friend, and had the honour of dwarves and wizards, and all such folk that ever passed that way, but he was no longer quite respectable. He was in fact held by all hobbits of the neighbourhood to be queer, except by his nephews and nieces on the Took side, but they were not encouraged in their friendship for their elders. I'm sorry to say that he did not mind. He was quite content and the sound of the kettle on his hearth was ever more musical than ever it had been in the quiet days before the unexpected party. His sword he hung over the mantelpiece. His coat of mail he was to arrange on a stand in the hall until he lent it to a museum. His gold and silver was largely spent in presents, both useful and extravagant, which to a certain extent accounts for the affection of his great nephews and nieces. His magic ring that he kept, a great secret, for he chiefly used it when unpleasant callers came. He took to writing poetry and visiting the elves, and though many shook their heads and touched their foreheads and said, "Poor old Baggins," and though few believed any of his tales, he remained very, very happy to the end of his days, and those were extraordinarily long. One autumn evening, some years after Bilbo was sitting in his study, writing his memoirs, he thought of calling them There and Back Again, A Hobbit's Holiday, when there was a ring at the door. It was Gandalf and a dwarf, and the dwarf was actually Balin. "Oh, come in, come in!" And soon they were settled by the chair. If Balin noticed that Mr. Baggins's waistcoat was more extensive and had real gold buttons, Bilbo also noticed that Balin's beard was several inches longer and that his jewelled belt was of magnificence. They fell to talking of their times together, and of course Bilbo asked how things were going in the lands of the mountain, and it seemed that they seemed to be going very well. Bard had rebuilt the town of Dale, and the men had to gather to him from the lake, from the south and the west, and all the valley had become tilled and rich, and the desolation was now filled with birds and blossoms in spring, and fruit and feasting in autumn. And Lake Town was refounded and was more prosperous than ever, and much wealth, and was up and down the river running, and there was friendship in those parts between the elves and men and dwarfs. The old master had come to a bad end. Bard had given him much gold for the help of the lake people, but being of that kind that easily catches such disease, he fell under the dragon sickness and took most of the gold and fled with it and died of starvation in the waste, deserted by his companions.
"The new master," said Balin. "The new master is of wiser kind and very popular, for of course he gets most of the credit for the present prosperity. They're making songs which say that in his day the river runs with gold."
And then the prophecies of the old songs have turned out to be true, after a fashion, said Bilbo.
"Of course," said Gandalf. "Well, why should they not prove true? Surely you don't believe the prophecies because you had a hand in bringing them about yourself? Don't you really don't believe, do you, that all your adventures and escapes were managed by mere luck, just for your sole benefit? You are a very fine person, Mr. Baggins, and I am very fond of you. But you are only quite a little fellow in a wide world after all."
"Well, thank goodness," said Bilbo, laughing. And he handed him the tobacco jar. The end. I would just like to say a huge thank you to everybody who's been part of this today. I know it's been a long old haul, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for making it possible, everybody. Again, to round up and say thank you to the teams that have put this together. Thank you, of course, to the Tolkien estate and to HarperCollins for allowing us to have this pleasure and for me to read this. It's been wonderful connecting with you all. I hope you've enjoyed it. Please, if you can, continue to donate to the cause. It would be amazing. It's doing very, very well. Not quite yet up to Captain Tom, but honestly nearly there. Thank you for joining me on this amazing journey. I've really loved sharing it with you. Hope you're well. Keep safe. Lots of love. Peace.